Hello, Jeff.
What is the name of this episode, Steve?
This episode is the Retro Hour versus This Week in Retro Showdown.
Showdown.
And
we are going to argue about which one is better.
that's right. Jeff, let me ask you a question. What do you think of the term dog baby? I feel like my dog is just like a very hungry robot.
You know, they're a little bit like that. I like your dog more than I like some of my children.
They may hear this one day. You know that, right?
No, they know I'm joking. Basically, no, I don't like the term fur baby, but I do, some people say they don't let the dog on the bed, and I say I would let my dog borrow my car before most people that I know. All right, so welcome to the boardroom.
Welcome to the boardroom. We still haven't fixed it. We're stuck with the boardroom for now.
We are doing a PowerPoint in the boardroom.
We're in the boardroom.
Okay, let's start off really quickly with news.
Mostly Atari news.
Okay. So, first news item is from me. There's a new version of Atari 8-bit Galaga that Paul Lay had started. This is by Scott Bradley. He said in his video, I was hacking Playsoft's great Galaga'ish demo for the Atari 8-bit and 5200 machines. This shows added stuff including 5-ship gameplay, double ship and extra ship bonuses, the status bar, indicator for ships left, and a new title instead of the high score value, which was never retained. And I played a little bit of this video for us to view. Take a look, Steve.
Good sounds.
The cool thing about this is he's actually sort of made the screen and the graphics look a little bit closer to the arcade than the ones that were in the original demo. It looks less like the 7800 and more like the arcade in this one.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I don't really understand why the Atari 8-bit and 7800 have such a hard time replicating Galaga, where the NES has a nearly perfect version. But
well, I'll tell you why. Only because of the high-res mode. So the 160 width screen that the Atari 8-bit has a little bit of trouble doing it because of the width. But the NES and the Commodore 64 both could do a few more colors in their high res, and that's why they can do it a little bit better. That's all. And more sprites. So NES can do 64 8x8 sprites. So
no, not on the screen at the same time. You do eight sprites per line. That's all it can do.
I think if Paul Lay had the time to actually complete this demo, or if this guy, Scott Bradley, who seems to be doing a really good job, is able to complete it, I think you're going to see something that is closer.
This looks really good. This is the best yet.
Next up, Atari Moviecart enclosure. What's this all about, Steve?
So, Atari Moviecart enclosure. So remember, a few weeks back, I showed you the Atari Moviecart that I got, and we played one of our videos on it. This is my friend Pete from Tilt. It's his little company that he makes retro games. He's building some NES games right now. I've played one of them. It's really good. I told Pete about the Atari Moviecart. He got one. He loves it. And he created on Thingiverse a 3D printable cartridge shell that has a slot to insert and take out the SD card. So you can go to the link we have to Thingiverse here and download it for free. And it's done by Pete from Tilt. So that's why that's here. And
now,
just so you
did
know,
I meet Pete?
I have one right here. So here's mine. I did today. I put it together. This is what it looks like. It's got the little slot here. It's very well constructed with 3 screws in the back. So very nice. I was very happy to finally put my cart together.
Now, did Pete send that to you?
Yes.
Okay. So did I meet Pete?
Yes, you've met Pete.
Okay. Pete is the most highly technical
Yeah,
person I've
Pete
ever
is
met.
amazing. So Pete also fixed my Vectrex for me too. So
Yes.
he's fantastic.
Yes. He went to the VCF with
Yes, he
us,
went to
right?
VCF.
VCF
Yes,
SoCal.
he's a cool dude.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Atari Age thread of the week. Okay, guess what this is? There's a new item you can add to your Harmony cart called Harmony Game Selector, done by Batari. It adds the ability to put 256 games on a multi-cart for the Atari 2600 Plus
Nice,
and choose them with dip switches.
nice.
It costs $15 and it's literally a game changer. That's a dad joke.
That's horrible.
That was a horrible dad joke.
So 15
What's it?
bucks. This pretty cheap.
15
How do you get
bucks.
it? Oh, you go buy it from the Harmony Cart. I see. It's from Atari
I
Age.
have the Atari Age forum link that will be in the show notes.
Very cool. So that was a good find from Atari Age this week. So late breaking Atari news that's not in here, Jeff. I saw today that Atari is putting out a Busby collection in 2025.
Oh,
So interesting. Busby is notorious. The first game was good. The sequels were not apparently that great. I think I even had Busby from my original PlayStation, but I didn't know. I did not read video game magazines at the time, the type that were out, so I didn't know about the controversy or anything along with Busby. So there's some
interesting
controversy.
is that the first Busby came out on the Jaguar.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So it's very Atari. Book Club.
Okay, book club. This is the book club for this week, and my choice this week is iWoz. Do you remember this book, Jeff?
Oh yeah, I have it right
This
here.
is the
I love
Steve
iWoz.
Wozniak memoir. It is unlike any book I have ever read before. Apparently, he dictated it directly to a writer, and it forms a kind of a stream of consciousness of Steve Wozniak. You get to kind of read how his brain works. It's like traveling through his head, traveling through the head of a genius. It goes off in places and comes back. Sometimes it's hard to follow, but it's like a holistic journey into the mind of Steve Wozniak. And he talks about working at Atari and Apple. He talks about the time Steve Jobs screwed him over. But to me, it's I mean, if you want to know Steve Wozniak, this book is like a trip into his head.
It's very good, and I have a very favorite part of this book. Do you want to hear what it
Yes,
is?
of course.
Okay. Well, so when he's building the Apple, I think it's the Apple II. It's after the Apple One, and he wants to write a basic for it. So he writes his own integer basic for it, and then decides he wants to make Breakout. So he makes Breakout in integer basic. It's a sideways version of Breakout. That entire section of the book is one of the most fascinating things I've ever read about somebody making a new machine and new software and then writing a game to work on it. It's like my wheelhouse exactly is that chapter of that book.
Interesting. Yeah, I love this book. That's why it's made it into the book club this week. And I think people should at least find a way to read it, if not own it.
Right. Exactly.
Okay,
Retro ad
so
of
this
the
is new.
week.
This is new. I'm trying a couple new things this week to see how they go over. This is the retro ad of the week. So I tried to find an advertisement from exactly 40 years ago. It's not exactly, but it's close. And examine its features. So let's go. This is from the Cincinnati Enquirer, an ad for Value City. And it's about the video game Blowout. It's from June 7th, 1984. So you see in the first part of the ad that I zoomed into, you've got some games for 1677, 1877. They're still trying to prop up some games. You've got some Activision games, some games for the ColecoVision, a lot of Activision games that are still trying to be sold at high prices, as well as some late or well done Atari 2600 games like Dig Dug and Centipede, like the well known arcade games. So that's cool, but it is kind of late. I mean, Atari is about to be sold to Jack Tramiel in about 3 weeks from this time. So let's go to the next page, and you'll see how it sort of devolves. Okay, so then you see they've got the ColecoVision is at $89.99, and then you've got a bunch of $8 games. Space Fury, a bunch of stuff for the ColecoVision like Space Fury, Space Panic, and Gorf, and then in television games that are well known and loved like Dungeons and Dragons and Bump and Jump, and they're $8, and then
Wow.
a set of stuff for
Wow.
$6. So a bunch of Atari stuff that you would probably think would fit here, like Super Breakout, Defender, Space Invaders, and Beam Rider by Activision for the Intellivision, which obviously didn't do that well. So let's go to the next one,
Vanguard is in there
Vanguard
too.
as well for
Angar's
$6.
Revenge.
And now we're gonna hit the rock bottom. Four
Oh,
dollars for $4. Most of the original Activision games, many of the original Atari 2600 games, Coleco Venture and Donkey Kong for the 2600, Raiders of the Lost Ark for the 2600, almost all the M Network games, Real Sports Soccer and Tennis, all go, oh, and Math Grand Prix. Whoever thought that? Oh, Tiger Vision King Kong too. Those are $4, and then
wow.
we hit the $3 section. For $3,
Atari Kroll, which is a game that I always wondered about.
I'm sure $3 for Kroll. If you bought that, you would have probably 100 times your money by this point if you have it. If you saved it and still had it in package, I think it's pretty rare. Kroll. I don't even know if it ever. I thought it didn't get to stores, but I may be wrong. It might not be $300 unopened, but it's probably a fairly good amount. But here's Earthworld and Fireworld, Parker Brothers Star Wars and Death Star Escape, and all
I
the
know.
Imagic stuff for $3. So this is still not the end of like this is the crash time, but this is not when the crash is the worst. That's going to take a few months for it to get the worst of the worst. But this is what games are selling for about 40 years ago.
The Create Worlds podcast has gone through the reasons for this in minute detail about the chargebacks and all these
Yep.
things that happen to make these go to that price. So if anyone's wondering if it was the ET cartridge, part of it, right? Pac-Man, all that part of it. But the real reasons are in that podcast, a bunch
Yeah,
of
so
episodes about it, mostly to do with chargebacks, and the companies actually ate their own and the distributors ate Atari, and there's some problems with everybody did some bad stuff. It wasn't just
right.
Atari.
So I was going to feature them this week in the Creator of the Week, but you had someone else in mind, so that's fine. We'll do that in an upcoming episode. We'll feature They Create Worlds. There's a lot of good to say about that podcast. It is really great.
Oh, it's
And they're
great
currently
podcast. Love it.
they're doing a two-parter about Exidy, and they just did one
Love
about
it.
Ramtech, which is the company that Exidy came from. And I mean, it is so in depth, and you're like, it's stuff you've never heard before. If you've only read the books that exist so far, and you haven't read Alex's book, the guy who does They Create Worlds, then you probably don't know any of what they're talking about, and it's fascinating.
You know the way Jeremy Parrish, which we'll cover him sometime too. He goes into in depth about every single NES game and how it plays and why it's a good or bad game.
Yeah,
That's what They Create Worlds does about companies, happenings, even some games. But really, it's they go into history the way that Jeremy Parrish goes into game. It's so good. Those are like some. I have other favorite podcasts, but those two are some of my
all
favorites
right, let's
right
go
there.
on.
PC DOS Game of the
PC
Week.
DOS Game of the
I
Week. This
chose
is your
this week.
choice.
I chose BlakeStone, Aliens of Gold.
Mm.
Where? You can get it on Steam in the Apogee Throwback Pack. You can also plug in any old disc you have into an old computer and play it if you have it, right? But if you want to get it now easily, you can get it on Steam. It's one of the first games that ever reskinned the Wolfenstein engine, and it's a swashbuckling space shooting adventure.
Really?
And the reason I chose
I
what's
said,
that?
really?
Yes. Well, the reason I chose it is that at the time I wanted another Wolfenstein like game, but I was bored of shooting Nazis. This game lets you shoot aliens on a
I don't
spaceship and a
understand.
bunch of
How
other
could you
stuff.
possibly get bored of shooting Nazis?
I mean, I shot all the Nazis.
Okay.
I had shot them
Right,
all.
you went
I
through it.
finished every single one. I even finished Rise of the Triad. So I was ready for something else, and what I got was BlakeStone Aliens of Gold. At the time, I think we just, on my PSL shareware discs, I think I probably just had the first set, but now I've repurchased it for real so that I can pay the Apogee guys some real money.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I remember this
Did
game.
you ever play this game at all,
I
Steve?
remember it now after you show it. I had totally forgotten about it, but I do remember us having this, and I do remember playing it too. So yeah, I do remember this now, which is kind of crazy that I had totally blocked it out of my mind. But yeah.
Well, it is a little blocky and dated looking, but I mean my Atari ST and Atari 7800 and 8-bit games I play are even more blocky or more dated. So, but it's a really nice game.
Okay, another page for this. Okay, remember last week we talked
Wow.
about Microsoft Decathlon and we couldn't get it to work on
Yes.
archive.org. Well, I went into DOSBox and I noticed that I never did this before. There's a bat file in the root directory called DOSBox and then the version number options.bat. If you run that, it'll open a text file. And in that text file, you can change a few things to try to get it to work. So there's a machine setting. They have it set to SVGA S3, which is probably why it doesn't work. You need to set this for games that were made that are that old to machine equals CGA. So that's the first one, machine equals CGA. And two more things you need to set. In the CPU section, you need to set the CPU type to 386 underscore slow, and then the cycles to 500. If you do that, it's just about the right speed for Olympic Decathlon. Some other old games may need you to lower that speed
Yeah.
even further, maybe even down to 100 cycles, and you can do that while DOSBox is running using Control F11 and Control F12. F11 goes down, F12 goes up. But this will allow you to play the game, and I will have a video of this exact thing and how to do it and what the game looks like without it and playing it later this week, hopefully.
This is fantastic. It's also a great set of details about using DOSBox for any other game too, for the early DOS games
So
that
after
don't
I did
work.
this, I said, well, what other DOS games could I find? Because I was thinking we're getting a little too we don't have to get that far into the 90s with the DOS games. There's
Right.
actually some stuff in the 80s that I think people would find interesting, especially because they're contemporaneous with the ST and with the 800 and those computers. So
Right.
I went and found an archive on archive.org of all 80s DOS games, and I downloaded it. Then I've been looking through 1981 and 1982, and I have played a few. One of my favorite games so far is called Executive Suite. It's like a kind of a text adventure, not really an adventure, it's a text-based game where you're supposed to try to where you get a job basically and try to make it in a corporation. And I have to tell you, it's really fun for being just a text game. So we may highlight that next time, Executive Suite. But there's other fun games too. I think I found the Asteroids game that you mentioned last week. I believe it's called Asteroid Avoider or something. I'll look at that too.
There's a game similar to what you're saying called Jones in the Fast Lane. It's not exactly, it's more graphics. It's a game
Well, that
that
came
I
much
want to check
later.
out at some point too. No, it's not that. It's in 1990 or 91.
Right.
But I'm just saying it's something that you just sparked me remembering a
That's right.
time when
Jones the
that
Fast
game
Lane
was available.
probably is a version of Executive Suite. Executive Suite's from 1982. It's from a company that only made one game. It's
Yeah,
really
maybe
interesting.
it is. We'll have to compare the two or something at some point.
That'd be interesting to compare the two. Jeff
So
is going to
next,
open a package. What do you got,
not
Jeff?
just open a package. I think what we're actually doing here is this is a crack the
This is
seal.
Crack the Seal.
Atari ST Midwinter.
Wow.
A game that I can't control or play well at all, but a game that I have a package shrink wrapped version of. It's an absolute classic on the 16-bit computers. And I'm going to open it right now.
I remember
So
seeing this in the in ST Action and
Right.
thinking that it looked amazing, but also looked complicated in a way that I didn't want to try to attempt it.
Okay, here's a...
And I wonder what's in the box.
Shrink wrap has come off the box. So here is the front of the
Now,
box.
who made this? What's the company?
Um, Rainbird.
Rainbird. Wow,
And
Rainbird.
this is the Kix XXL cheap version. So this is like like probably 2 years later, this was the budget label version of it. Let me get this box open. Here's the back of the box while I'm trying to open it. Let's see what Kix XXL threw into this. Admittedly, thin version of what probably was a very thick box at the time. But I get what I can get, man. I get what I can get. Okay, so this box contains just a baggie with the midwinter instructions. Seems to be very slim compared to
Yeah, it's
regular
probably a
midwinter
cut down
instructions.
version of the instructions.
Let's look at that real quick. Probably because this only has ST info in it and not ST Amiga. Let me check
Yeah,
it
but
out.
I
Maybe
would
I'm wrong.
imagine there was a full booklet for this, but maybe we don't know. We have to look at Atari Mania and see. Actually, I'm going to do that right
I'm
now.
telling you, man. Check this out. Check this out. 3 pages, and then it moves to the next language, and that includes Atari ST, Amiga, and IBM PC all in one little booklet. So there's only 3 pages of instructions. Honestly, this is what I need. A cheat sheet, actually, for playing Midwinter. What else is in this package? Really quickly, we have Midwinter double-sided disc. So this, they, instead of putting it out on 2 discs, they put it out on one double-sided disc and thumb their nose at the Atari ST owners with only a single-sided drive, which they should have done by this time. And here is a little booklet of games also put out by Kix XXL. We will get to that later, but there's some good stuff in this
I'll
little
tell you
booklet.
what, I
Anyway,
don't know if
so
the original instructions were any longer.
so you don't
Yeah,
know?
an
Okay.
Atari
Maybe they
Mania
weren't.
doesn't have, if there was a full instruction booklet, they don't have it. So it's possible that
Well,
it's the same thing.
I have a download of lots and lots of ST and Amiga instructions, and I could see if it was longer, but maybe it's not. Anyway, this is great because even if I just want to emulate it, I have the instructions. I don't have an ST that has a disk drive in it. It has a replacement drive, so I can't actually play discs at the moment. So I'd have to play that in
Well,
emulation.
that was fun.
But let's move on to the next
Feedback!
feedback.
This is feedback from Jolt 7800, who obviously has 7800 in the name. And also, Jolt is named after Jolt Cola. So he's hitting on a couple into the vertical blank cylinders right there. So, a couple things. One, he said he likes the Overscan. Overscan gets
Nice.
better every week. Thanks for so much interesting info layered into the segments, like the tier list, which we haven't done again. Guess that's disappointing, right? And then he gave us a tip.
Give us a
It was
tip. Now,
nice.
anyone, well, not everyone that's in our friends and supporters list has given us a tip. A lot of them have given us other things. So some have given us money through the, I
Coffee
think it
cup?
was Kofi. This is the first one. I think this is actually maybe the second one we've got on here. So, Steve, guess
What?
what? Jolt 7800 has now been added in to the list of friends and supporters in every single episode's
Oh,
description.
that's fantastic.
So thank you, Jolt 7800.
And then he had another one. He actually, when we had the homebrew debate last week, he leaned in and he said he leans on my side with the original homebrews. So there.
I can understand why.
I think it's interesting. I also, by the way, saw a thread on Facebook that I don't want to get into exactly who was talking about it yet because it was Rebecca Heineman and Tony Barnes, and they were talking about homebrew. And of course, both Rebecca Heineman and Tony Barnes made real games back in the day and still do, right?
Right.
So their view of homebrew is different, and it actually sort of strikes me a little bit how David Crane and the guys from Audacity think of homebrew. It kind of, in some ways, might rub them the wrong way because they think it maybe gives people the impression that things could have been done better back in the day when really the
Oh, I
amount of
see.
tools and things that exist now make it so much easier. I don't think that that's true. I think it may be true for some people, but I think to me, those guys are the masters. Those people are the masters. What they did back then could never be overdone, overcome, or undermined. It's just that people like to dabble now, and that's it.
I understand exactly why they would think that.
Yeah, me too.
It's not sour grapes at all. It's almost like, think about your Todd Fry. You made 4K Pac-Man, and then a bunch of people have made 4K Pac-Man now saying theirs is better. Technically, theirs might be better, but they didn't have to make it two players,
Yeah,
right?
and they didn't have to
There
do it
are
in 2K, and they
caveats in
didn't
all
have
of things, right?
Atari marketing people and blah 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 blah.
Right, right,
Here's something
exactly.
I saw today that maybe hit home a little bit with you. I saw someone posting something about how with ChatGPT they could easily build an HTML5 game. And I'm thinking, okay, that's cool. Like there'll be people making really simple, easy HTML5 games now.
Right.
But 15 years ago, we had to do it all by hand. There were no
All by
frameworks,
hand.
there were no nothing. We had to build the canvas from scratch. We wrote a book about it. But my point being is
Right.
that I could have sour grapes about that and go, "Oh my God, they don't know how easy it is. We had to just do it. We had to make our own display list. Like you know what I mean, right?" I
Right.
probably would
Exactly. And
feel
we
that
did.
way. In fact, I did feel that way a little bit when I saw that news. So I understand where they're coming from.
All game development takes a lot. There is no shortcut no matter what tool set you have. So there are game makers, but game making software. But if you're actually coding on the machine in a language, whether you have it on a new digital audio workstation for music or whether you have a new IDE or whatever, at the end of the day, you still need to write the code and make the game work. So, yes, the environment is easier, and people have, because of that, they can make some better stuff, and there's better tools and frameworks and things like that. But at the end of the day, the people who are making homebrew are working their asses off to make those
Right.
homebrew games
So,
still.
but anyway,
Okay.
thank you, Joel, for your feedback.
Creator
Who
Spotlight.
will it be this time, Jeff? Who's going to be the
I
creator?
don't know who it is. Well, I know who it is. I know who it is. It is Zero Page Homebrew.
Zero Page Homebrew. The tireless Zero Page Homebrew that covers almost every homebrew that is posted on Atari Age.
For all Atari machines, some other machines too, but mostly it's Atari. Like 99% of their coverage is Atari 8-bit, 2600, 7800, maybe some Jaguar, maybe some Lynx, but it's really the 8-bit and never no ST really, but the 8-bit machines, and they do an incredible job of
Yeah,
it.
they do reviews or just coverage, playthroughs on Twitch. They do reviews kind of. They're never really negative. They usually try to find
No,
something positive to say about everything. They have a YouTube channel, Facebook, again, Twitch. There was some controversy about them that I saw on Facebook a few months back where there were some people who don't post their homebrew on Atari Age saying that Zero Page Homebrew ignores them. I mean, the truth is, doing a podcast like this and like what they do, you can't just scour the internet for everything.
no,
Like,
you
it's
cannot.
very
Give it to
hard.
them.
So they probably gravitate to Atari Age to find the homebrew
Right.
because that's where it's announced. That's where they can get the ROMs and play them and stuff like that. I'm going to say that that's probably all it is. Is they just it's
Yeah.
they're not getting paid for any of this. So
No, this is Zero Page Homebrew is a professional operation in name only. They do a professional job. They're not making any money at this.
no.
So this is something they do in their spare time. So you want them to look at your game, send it to them. They found games of yours on Atari that you didn't even want anyone to look at, and they found it
Yeah.
and covered it. So they do a good job. If it's on Atari, it just seems like it's easier for them to
I just think
find.
that's it. I think that's it.
Yeah,
So
it's
Zero
easy to
Pitch
find there.
Homebrew, great contributor to the Atari community. Does a lot of great stuff. They do this yearly contest where they give awards away too. I think it's thankless. It takes so much time for them to put it together, and I'm sure it's nice for their podcasts and stuff. But it's a thing. These things are thankless sometimes. So I
Right,
really appreciate what they
right.
do.
They do a fantastic job.
Okay, new one.
Ancient video game and computer
Okay,
comics.
so let's just This is another new thing that I want to talk about. I want to see if there's any reaction to the ads or the comics here. Now, this is King Features. I'm not even sure we're allowed to even show this, but we'll try it this time because we're doing a little commentary. This is the first computer cartoon that I found in my searching for cartoons in the newspaper. Okay, and it shows a guy using a mainframe. It's a guy in a suit because only guys in suits at the time would be thought of to use computers. The computer's printed out a paper that says "Fire Fenwick," and then the line from the guy is, "Oh Fenwick, have you been kicking the computer again?" So my point is, this is computer humor from 1972.
Not just computer. This is laugh
This is
time.
laugh time. So this is by a guy named Bob Schroeder, who I actually looked up. He's well known as a mid-century cartoonist for the Saturday Evening Post, editor for Laugh a Day, which is a one-panel cartoon series and King Features ran from 1936 to 1998. It's possible that he died in 1998. I don't know because I couldn't find a obituary for him. He also worked on a long-running strip called Hocus Focus that displayed two cartoons side by side and asked readers to spot the difference. But this to me is the first. I'm sure there may be computer cartoons from earlier. This is the first that I've found, and I think it shows a lot computer humor or humor with computers and video games in cartoons is very sort of oddly negative for the next decade after this. So,
Very poignant for me, having just listened to the first two chapters of Hackers. I'm into the third one now, where they move from all of these computers and how the magicians and people that sat, the guys who controlled the computer, and that's what Fenwick actually looks like, one of the guys controlling the computer,
yes, he
like the only
does.
guys that get to touch the keyboard.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
let me.
anyway, I don't know if these are interesting or not, but I found a whole bunch of cartoons. A lot of them are editorial cartoons too, which are interesting as well. So we'll see if we talk about any more of these going up. I thought it's something to add. These ads or these cartoons that because I spent a bunch of time in 2021 sick and just going through thousands and thousands of newspapers trying to find articles and stuff. And I guess I want to see if any of it's interesting to anyone.
Right, right. Well, it's good. I mean, you did all the research, so bring it out. Boardroom debate.
What is the boardroom debate this week, Jeff?
Well, it was in the title. It is Retro Hour versus This Week in Retro, a showdown.
Showdown. So my favorite, I didn't realize This Week in Retro existed, and I've been listening to the Retro Hour for 2 or 3 years now, maybe more, maybe 3 or 4 years now. And then just this year, you sort of clued me into the fact that This Week in Retro actually last year, that This Week in Retro is really good. I started listening to it too, and I also noticed that they kind of know each other as well. They those two podcasts do interact at certain events and stuff.
I go far back with both of these. The Retro Hour I started listening to within their first couple seasons, but got heavy into it right when the pandemic hit. They were basically getting ready to build a new studio,
Right,
and that didn't happen. And now they still do it from then, and they figured out, finally realizing they could all just do this from home,
right.
right? And so they do. I think I don't know, maybe they go to a studio now, but they were doing it. So that was a long time, all the way through the pandemic till now. It's only gotten better, and I have some things to say about how these guys have evolved. This Week in Retro started with John Schaller and Neil, and Neil, RMC Retro Neil, and it has evolved from John and Neil together, John leaving, then adding in people, and then people leaving, and we'll get into those people as we go through the discussion.
All right. So the Retro Hour is Dan, Ravi, and Joe. They have amazing interviews. So they really are an interview show. Every
Yes.
single episode has some interview with some person who's been working in games or retro games forever. And it's their interviews are bar none amazing. A lot of them are in the book that they produced that we both bought. They also have a news section at the beginning, which is curated but good. And if you're a subscriber, I think you get a bigger news section if you're one of their backers. They're younger than us, probably by about at least 10 years. So I think Dan is about 10 years younger. The other guys are even younger.
I think Joe might be 12. No,
Is it
I think he's actually 30, and the I think Joe's the youngest of them, and then Ravi and Dan met when Dan started dating one of Ravi's friends or something like that. Anyway, that's
interesting?
all in the show.
So,
It's not gossip.
when I realized just a couple weeks ago, when I realized that the Amiga lasted far longer than the ST, like almost into the 2000s, I started realizing why these guys are so into the Amiga because it really is their
Right.
thing. The ST is kind of like wasn't even a thing. It disappeared probably before they really knew that it existed. And I did on Twitter a couple times. I got mad at Dan, no, sorry, got mad at Dan, and I'd say, "You,
Dan.
hey, dear internet, you made fun of the Atari ST." And Dan's like, "No, we didn't really do that." And then I felt really bad about it.
I just think that they use the term crap ST port way more than they should. They were Amiga fanboys, not understand too young to even understand the context of what they were saying. So we had to kind of try to help educate them a little bit. We didn't help at all. But I think over time they've educated themselves a little bit on the merits of both machines and how the Amiga obviously won and went forward. The Amiga was competing against the PC.
Yeah,
The ST was competing against the Commodore 64, really, and the Spectrum and the Amiga. But really, ST had its heyday before the Amiga even became a viable, really well
it's
selling
kind of a
platform.
little bit like how the Atari 800 was viable before the Commodore 64 hit.
Yes,
And
it
then
certainly
Commodore
was.
64 took over, and then the ST came out. It didn't really take over the Commodore 64. A lot of people just went to the
No.
Amiga after the Commodore 64. In certain places, the ST was, but they've started to embrace the ST a little bit. They do have ST news. They don't really talk down about it as much anymore, which I really like. I think it's Joe who's putting a full-on Amiga, like,
It's Ravi.
oh, was it
It's Ravi.
Ravi? Putting full-on
Yeah.
Amiga shows. Dan loves his Jaguar. Dan seems to have every system on the planet in his game room. So that's the Retro Hour, and that's the Retro Hour. Well, tell me about this week
Well,
in
and
retro.
not just okay. So one other thing about the retro is this: they're very, very, very much mainstream, and this is not a bad thing. Mainstream what happened in the UK in gaming. So they didn't make any mistakes with their gaming, right? Some of them are, Amiga. I don't know what their 8 bits were if they had any, but
Spectrum,
Amiga,
Specky or whatever. What was before that?
Spectrum
Yeah.
maybe, but they're very much so. They have like the heart of the mainstream UK gaming audience, and they move to different consoles and platforms. They're very much focused, except for the Amiga, on console games and what happened, and they're very much individual game focused for console style games. So that's where they are,
Well,
and
and
they're
what's
not
interesting is
high.
for us, since we were really into the ST, a lot of the game titles and the companies and stuff that they talk about, we also know a lot about, like
Right, of
the
course, of course.
Oceans and the Bitmap Brothers and stuff like that. Even though they like those games on
Gremlin.
the yeah, exactly, they like those games on the Amiga. It's still they'll have interviews with people and be like, oh yeah, Firebird. The reason why I gravitate towards listening to them instead of and if there is an American retro podcast, I don't know what it would be, but but I like them because their pathway was maybe the Atari 2600, if anything, and then the Amiga, it was or maybe the C64, the Amiga, which has a lot of crossover with the ST, then the Genesis, then the PlayStation, and then the PC. And so those are kind of the way we went as well. So there's a lot of, even though they're younger than us, they do the sensibilities are very close, and
Right,
that's what I
because
really
of the
like about them.
UK. Also, they are really into games like Beneath the Steel Sky and those, which all were PC games here, and getting into CD-ROM games, but they were on the Amiga. They were hit on the Amiga really big in the UK.
Right.
Okay, so this week in retro. I'll explain a little bit about these guys, Steve.
So this is Neil and Dave now. So Neil runs
RMC Neil. and Dave
Yeah.
Velociraptor.
Neil runs the
Okay.
cave, which I do not know where it is, but it is a retro sort of museum slash arcade that you buy tickets to, and they have all sorts of events there. And so Neil has a lot of stories about buying, restoring games, buying games, doing stuff like that, and the events that happen at the cave, which is interesting, very interesting. Well, Dave is pretty much an ST guy. And so Dave and PC too, PC and ST. And
He now has an Amiga though. He's got some Amigas. He's got some other stuff. He's also a CPC guy, which was the CPC fantastic machine.
you say Dave is Scottish.
Dave is
He's a
Scottish.
brother in Scottish because we're Scottish as well. We'll part anyway. These guys are roughly our age. They're maybe a couple of
Right.
years younger, but they're roughly the same. It's roughly from our generation. Their opening theme is the best opening theme I've ever heard for anything. I just love it. You know what I'm talking about? Where
Yeah.
they have it's perfect because when they have a little thing with a guy saying these kids are not afraid of computers, I'm like that's exactly what our opening theme is about, but not so elegantly as theirs does.
Yeah, exactly. There's just like one sentence and it's done. It's like crap. They did it so much better.
What's really good about them is they have a subreddit and they keep their community involved by asking a question of the week and actually soliciting news from their subreddit. And it really makes it feel like people are getting involved in what they're doing. They chose one of my things once, which made me feel good, right? What do you think about them?
Well, it started with John, Schaller, and Neil. Then it went to Neil and Dave. And then they added 005 Agima. I think it's Agima. And then he's gone now, so now it's just Dave and Neil again. And they have guests. So to me, they are the computer game guys.
Yes,
That's why I
yes.
listen to them the most. So the difference between these two is slightly, there are not a lot of interviews. Sometimes they do interviews on This Week in Retro. Mostly it's news. The news comes from the community. The Retro Hours news comes from the community too, but they choose them also. It's very similar when it comes to the news, but they are very much into computer games. Now they do stuff about other genres and other machines and stuff like that. But they both come from 8-bit computers and then 16-bit computers and then PCs. So to me, I very much identify with This Week in Retro for the technical aspect and where they're coming from. And so that's why, and I wake up Saturday mornings, this is the first thing I watch or do on Saturday morning, like a lot of people. This is the first thing to do on Saturday morning is watch this show. It's like a Saturday morning cartoon to me.
It's like the first thing people do on Wednesday. They go give our podcast a thumbs down on YouTube.
So in the Retro Hour, the first thing I do on a Thursday night, which is tonight, is when I'm done and I'm starting to do chores and I can listen to something, I put on the Retro Hour.
So I
So
do
each
think
one of
out
them
of
has.
all the people on these podcasts, I like Dave the most. I think I identify with him the most, and I think he's the best. I assume that if he likes something or doesn't like something, I will also not like it or like it. So I sort of trust him when whatever he says because of his background. It's mostly
I
true
um
too.
I think s- I think on each podcast, so I think I like Dave and Neil the most, but the reason I identify with Dave is he's an Atari ST guy, and we've identified with him multiple times on Twitter, talking to him about various things and stuff like that. The first time he made it into This Week in Retro, I sent him a diatribe about the Atari ST. He probably tried to block us, but he didn't. And then for the Retro Hour, I've watched before the Retro Hour even knew what the Retro Hour was. I was watching Dan's YouTube channel,
Oh, really?
and so I didn't know he does a lot of Trash to Treasure. Also, he had done a Trash to Treasure Atari ST one. Maybe it was not before, but right around the time I really started listening to podcasts weekly, and so I think I saw that and then started watching weekly. And he, gave the ST a good rinse, through it. They did a good job, cleaned it up, made it work. But a lot of these times, these guys haven't been they don't try an Atari ST. I'm sorry. A lot of times on the Retro Hour, they were talking down about Atari. Now, all these podcasts are starting to talk up about Atari. What Atari's been doing is not not crypto and hotels
Right. They
and
were
hats
all
and
making
crap.
fun of Atari with the crypto and the
Yeah,
hotels.
now Atari's giving them something not to make fun of, and
Yeah.
I think that's more interesting to listen
I think
to
that
now
is
that you're
true.
not
It makes
making fun
it
of
makes
them.
it more fun to listen to. I say that for the Retro Hour, there really is no verses here. I just want to talk about
No, they're
both of
both
them.
great.
They're both great. I think we identify specifically because of the ST, so we read all the ST magazines and stuff, and so it's maybe easier for us to understand like some of the things that they're doing than other people might. But that's why I think I gravitate towards these two. Then there must be some US based retro game podcast, but besides the Atari ones, I don't know any of them. These are the
I'm
ones
sure
that I
there are.
listen to.
In this vein, that really, really goes to the things that I'm interested in. These two solve the problem every week.
Oh yeah.
I don't need an American version.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if there was one, it would be mostly NES focused or Sega focused anyway, and it
And
wouldn't interest me. So
I'll tell you one reason why the British ones to me are better. These guys will talk about the early British computers, in the same breath talk about the NES, in the second next breath talk about the Amiga or the Atari ST or whatever. When if you get an American one, the NES guys normally aren't going to know F all about the Commodore 64. They're not going to talk about it. You know what I mean? Like the British ones, these two particularly, understand the entire breadth of all of it and talk about it. And
now,
that's why I like these the best.
If I'm say that I agree with you, I bet they exist. We just don't know what they are. I'd love to hear.
I just don't know. If someone knows of a good one, send it.
That covers everything, right? That's
that covers
what I'd like
everything.
to say. I'm not sure that Americans wouldn't do it. I think that what we've heard are ones that focus on certain things
Right.
after the Atari era. That's pretty much, and these guys both go back. There is no Atari era and after. You know, there's no NES era and before, because to them the NES isn't that big of a deal. So the NES didn't sell that well in the UK. The Sega's what they got. So they don't really have that dichotomy where anything that came before the NES doesn't exist, right? And so I think that's what I probably appreciate the most is they don't have that line in the sand. They don't have that, oh, there was a big crash and that's all the old guys, they like that stuff. To them it's just all retro gaming and all valid. And I think that's probably what I gravitate to the most.
I think because it didn't end for us either. We went straight through from the beginning, from the 70s all the way through till now, and basically so have these two podcasts. At least if they weren't alive, they cover it.
Right.
So, and they know what's going on.
Well, that was fun, Jeff. Now I think we're off for at least a week coming up.
Yeah, we were going to be off this week. Now we're going to be off next week.
Right. So we are leaving the Overscan
and going into the vertical blank.
Into the vertical blank.
But the song is actually out of the vertical blank.
We're going out of the vertical blank. Okay, we're leaving the Overscan and going out of the vertical blank.
We're leaving the Overscan and going out of the vertical blank. I'm going to leave all this in.
The vertical blank.
We were children of the Silicon Revolution, an X generation conscripted to fight the console and home computer wars. A product of an analog 70s childhood, we came of digital age in the 80s, believing we could affect the world 8 bits at a time. Armed with joysticks, full-stroke keyboards, Jolt Cola, and MTV haircuts, we proceeded into the vertical blank. There, we stayed up late at night, devising incantations from D&D rulebooks and beginner's all-purpose symbolic instruction code. Video games were the match, and programming was the fuse, as the infinite possibilities of the digital world exploded into the internet age to come. We are Generation Atari.